Whoa, has it really been this long since I did one of these? Well, where do I, pick up again? Frankly, why not this? I mean, it was a hot-button issue last year, and it's something that, being a filmmaker myself, is something that's always on the forefront of my mind, which is, where is this whole show going, Where, 10, 20, 30 years down the line are we going to be at? What's the industry going to be like? How are people getting employed? How do people get in? Which, in my case, the most pressing thing on my mind. I mean, where is this all going to go? How are things going to change? In particular, I think this right here, the internet, has helped completely revolutionize the landscape, and the birth of sites like YouTube and Vimeo and all those other places. They've given filmmakers an outlet that they never dreamed of, not even back in the late 90s. I mean, you look at some of the indie success stories like Tarantino and Smith and Rodriguez, those were the exception, Plenty of people just got stuck in the, show in a couple of theaters and then maybe get a VHS or DVD release. But now you can get your film seen by thousands, if not millions of people within just a few days, without having to deal with shady distributors, without having to deal with questionable contracts that make sure that they get more money than you do, without a whole plethora of other things. And what's more, younger filmmakers, film students, film enthusiasts, or even kids who are just mucking around with their dad's camera, now they have a platform where they can share their work, where they can get feedback, where they can be appreciated and praised and criticized, and it's frankly quite an impressive and beautiful thing. And when you mix that in with just how much cheaper cameras and sound equipment are getting, that's impressive stuff. I mean, nowadays, most computers come with perfectly decent editing software. I mean, nothing as complex as something like Final Cut or Avid, but enough to get you started on your first couple of, little shorts here and there. Not brilliant, but it's quite a step forward over those old blue plasticky bricks that you used to get back in the 90s that would do these weird little fades and things on your old tapes. Now, you can get really professional looking video out of your standard DSLR. Pentax, Canons, Nikons, you name it. They all come with a surprisingly decent amount of features, and, at least now, not do the really complex stuff, but I mean, green screen now is becoming a lot more common. A lot of programs are now available that can do that. You're getting people, especially the young, becoming more and more tech savvy every single year, and now you're seeing some pretty professional stuff. I mean, just look at the big boom in things like fan films. Look at the production values and the effects on those. I mean, yeah, they're not going to give Hollywood a run for their money, but they're getting better all the time. People are getting more and more daring and experimental with the hardware and the software. Now, if you're a young filmmaker, you've got a lot more tools and advantages than your predecessors had not even 10 years ago. And with the big digital revolution that has basically changed our world, now you have a platform that is so much bigger than you ever had before. Plus, while also on the topic of indies, programs and places like Kickstarter and all those other fundraising places, now you don't have to deal with banks or, trying to get money out of little old ladies at weird little parties. Now, you can go there, set up your organization, maybe post up a quick advert on YouTube, and boom, couple of $1,000 to make your movie, there you go. It's really getting simpler all the time to do stuff, and that is really the key word when discussing at least one aspect of the future, which is it's going to keep getting simpler and simpler and cheaper to get really good quality video and sound and effects and editing programs for newcomers and for mainstream types. But then, of course, there's the mainstream side. And last year, for those of you who don't know, there was sort of this thing flying around. Famously, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were at these lectures, as I recall, and they were talking about what they saw as the future of Hollywood, and they said that with the way things are going, they might very well start going belly up, and the whole system might have to go through another overhaul like it did back in the 80s or back in the 50s when the big studios finally collapsed. of course, there are a number of, big recent examples of movies that didn't quite perform as they should have, and I doubt I need to regurgitate those names here, but you know the obvious suspects, your John Carters, your Lone Rangers, your various January movies that really had no business being in theaters in the first place, but that's a discussion for another time. Films that just did not quite meet their quota. And of course, it doesn't help that you're getting just loads of movies every single week being thrown into theaters. And what do? You get the same thing that happened back in 1983 when the video game crash in North America happened. You get too much product. There's just too much on the shelves, or in theaters in this case, and the consumer can't make up their mind as to what they want. The glut of product is certainly a problem, and it helps explain why, profits haven't exactly been phenomenal. I mean, of course, Iron Man 3 making $2 billion indicates that we're not quite seeing the end of the blockbuster age just yet, but it's something to bear in mind, certainly, when trying to think about, well, where is this going to be even 10 years down the line? I mean, are we still going to see stuff like Iron Man 3 or the like being produced on that kind of scale in this fashion, or is it all going to change? I mean, let's face it, right now we've seen within the last 5 years a big change in the whole media market with the advent of streaming and the rise of things like Netflix. I mean, House of Cards, whoever thought that a service provider would get around to making their own original content? Whoever thought that was going to happen like 10 years ago? Like, that would be like saying, Blockbuster back when they were actually, in existence, were going to produce a TV show. It's not something you ever thought was going to happen, but here we are, and they've already got a number of series under their belt, and Amazon is joining in on the fun as well. So, could movies down the line be produced that way, especially given, the big changes in the way that films are distributed? I mean, even now, cinemas have streaming services, though they do this mostly for live plays. Like the other day I was down at an Odeon, and they had this live performance of Don Quixote. I don't remember which theater company was doing it, but it was a big high-profile production. Never would have seen that, even 5 years ago. So, could we at some point see movies being delivered in that manner? Could the theater in and of itself become obsolete? Well, it's one of those things that I think is hard to ask. I mean, at some point, probably. It's the same thing with DVDs and Blu-rays. There are people out there who like the feel of, of the actual physical media in the same way people like to go to the cinema and, have popcorn and sit in those comfy seats. But let's face it, at some point things have to change. And, well, digital and downloading, they're just cheaper. There's just no two ways about it. I'm personally a physical media guy, but even I can see that stuff will change at some point. And I think that when it comes to film, of course, will this happen in movies? Will there be a time when you can just watch everything at home, and when the movie theater just doesn't matter, and when films can get that kind of big scale funding? I mean, there have been a couple of little features, but they're little like dramas and comedies. They're nothing that is impossible to produce from these, types of services. It's gonna be a while, but it would not be impossible at some point down the road, though certainly far down it, that we'll see a production with the kind of budget that something like Noah has, or The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I mean, it's not impossible, and certainly just look at how good something like House of Cards looked. In a couple of years' time, we could see something that, has even more money put into it, and is just as viable as a theater for making its money back. I mean, we're not quite into the millions and billions that you can get out of a movie theater, but hey, we're getting down that road, and I don't think it will be necessarily an overly long way until we arrive at that point. And once again, when you mix that in with just the way that technology is getting cheaper and more user-friendly, now is a great time to be, a practicing filmmaker, because you have all these platforms that are just your playground, that you can get your little shorts and little movies seen in ways you never could have just even a couple of years back. Now you have a gigantic audience at your fingertips. But if we just put the money to one side, what about the films themselves? Like, will there be another big cultural shift the same way there was back in the 70s when we got this wave of different, refreshing cinema that just did things that nobody had seen up until that point? I mean, you look at the 60s, you think of big, epic films, You think of big, lavish musicals, and then the 70s comes along, and what do you get? You get hard, gritty, harsh films. You get Taxi Driver. You get the rise of directors like Scorsese and Bogdanovich and Coppola. Guys who weren't afraid to be a little bit brutal and bloody and blunt about their sentiments, and who were very much looking at the world that they were living in with very harsh eyes. I mean, Chinatown in and of itself has been read as a big satire on the way that Los Angeles government was run, that is just one of the many meanings that cinema from that time period had. And, not to say that there aren't movies like that nowadays, but of course the big things that everybody talks about are the big blockbuster comic book films and whatnot. So if this, supposed, end of the big bloated Hollywood comes, will that mark another change? It's certainly possible, although to be fair, considering so many taboos by this point have been broken as far as cinema goes, how much left is there really to shock an audience? I mean, there are still plenty of stories to tell, plenty of new avenues and ideas to explore that haven't tapped yet, but in terms of presentation, how much more visceral and bloody can you really get? How much more to the point? How much more harsh? How much more unrepentant can you be with showing people that, this is the reality of the world you live in, that not everything that happens on a movie screen is magical and heightened fantasy? Let's face it, the last decade was a slew of these gritty, found footage and torture porn horror flicks that were just actively pushing the gross factor. So really it begs, well, where do we go from here? And certainly, now, of course, we're dealing a lot more in terms of the psychological, and I think that would be an interesting route to go down, is really exploring the effects of the world on people. I mean, you have to look at movies like Her, which very much look at the sort of changing dynamics of the way humans interact with the world around them, especially with all the technology around. And it's certainly something that I think films can continue to explore. I mean, Transcendence, which is coming out this year in 2014, is also dealing with the idea of humanity combining with technology and what the results of that could be. And this also can be applied to foreign films. Once streaming really hits its stride and just becomes the standard for every type of release, global cinema could really just be more recognized and well known. You wouldn't need to go through expensive import fees. You wouldn't need to deal with overpriced DVDs from smaller DVD companies like Optimum. You could just pick it up for the same price as any other title on the service, and there you go. You could see movies from France, Spain, Germany, Italy, Japan, China, Korea, Brazil. The possibilities are limitless. I mean, already in the past couple of years, we've seen that these movies can break out and be well known. Blue is the Warmest Color, The Artist, all of the Studio Ghibli stuff, a lot of anime from Japan. We've seen stuff from abroad really break out here, and this could be the next step forward, and that's really exciting. And certainly would lead to a great combination and exchange of influences for the next generation of filmmakers, which offers a lot of really exciting possibilities, and frankly, I think that would be just outstanding and lead to that breath of fresh air that many feel is needed. And certainly for the future of the business, I hope that things, go about as smoothly as they can, and hopefully things will start coming together, and when the next generation of filmmakers comes out, the next Aronofskys, the next Nolans, the next Spielbergs, we'll see a truly global cinema, not just, here's America and then all these other little places to the side. We'll have a truly global film industry, a truly global film community. That is some inspiring stuff, let me tell you.